see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogs on how to build a culture of empathy. And I'm here today with David Hazen, and thanks for joining me, David.
Thanks, Edwin. I'm glad we're doing this.
Yeah, so you're a good friend of mine, and you're also you live in Eugene, Oregon, and you're a peace activist, and you've written a book called Love Always Wins, and so maybe you could just kind of tell me a little bit more about yourself as well.
Well, I've had 7 different careers. I've been a boat builder, sign maker, school teacher, customer service, and alcohol drug counselor. I've got a master's degree in holistic systems design. And I've been politically active since 2004 and the Bush re-election. And I got involved in the campaign for U.S. Department of Peace. And after doing that for a few years, I decided that it would be more effective for me to act locally. And so now I'm working on the Eugene City of Peace initiative, which is just starting to pick up some momentum, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, so you're like a super activist, and I'm just on your Facebook page, and I see you've got kind of your photo of yourself is kind of this heart with 3 dots in it, and in the background are like a bunch of leaves. Is there some significance to all that?
Oh, those leaves are folded origami cranes. They are peace cranes.
Oh, okay.
They are in Ohio at a museum for peace in Wilmington, Ohio. Well, anyway, and the heart and the flame and the circle with the 3 circles inside of it is like a combination of symbols, basically meaning that my heart is on fire for the spirit of collaboration. The 3 circles represent collaboration.
Well, sorry.
And I didn't design that, actually. The 3 circle part that came from Nicholas Roerich in the 1930s, who developed the Roerich Pact for the European and American nations to protect culture, art, and religion during times of war.
Oh, wow. Well, I was looking all through your websites. You see you've got your Facebook page, you have a website for your book, Love Always Wins, and then a blog where you have the photo of a cute photo of you and as a baby, I guess.
Yes, I was 3 months old.
and kind of the thing that really struck me was your book, Stripper's Guide to Canoe Building. I think that really encapsulates a lot there. And you made all these canoes. I mean, they're really beautiful. It looks like works of art. So that was really pretty cool.
Yeah, there was a period of my life, about 4 years in the early 1970s, where I built canoes for customers and really enjoyed the design process. And built about 65 canoes in that 4-year period, and then wrote a book. And I like double entendres, so that's where the title comes from. Wood strips are the material out of which those canoes are made, so you can call yourself a stripper when you're applying the strips to the molds. And the forms.
Yeah, I've got the photo of it looks like kayaks and canoes, and you made even a car out of it, electric car.
Oh yeah, that was my most recent project. I thought of doing this back in the 1970s, but it wasn't until I was about ready to retire that I actually decided I needed another vehicle, but I did not want a gas-powered vehicle. It had to be electric. And I had to have some protection from rain and cold wind. So I did some research online and decided a 3-wheeled vehicle was the way to go. And then with the help of an engineer and a welder and some other people, mechanics, I put together my own design. And it's still on the road. It's got over 6,000 miles on it, just running errands around town. It's just a neighborhood electric vehicle.
Yeah, it looks great. It's like a work of art, really.
Well, it catches a lot of attention, and that's part of my purpose, was to attract people's eyes so that they would eventually see that this is an all-electric car, and that electric cars don't have to look dorky.
Well, what we really wanted to get into, I mean, that's pretty cool, is get into your book. And, in your book is kind of framed, it seems to be about the problem of society being violence, and how do we move from violence through nonviolence to peace and love and empathy. Is that kind of an adequate framing of?
Yeah. My latest motto is that I want to break the logjam of despair. That is basically my life mission right now. Is the despair that I see around me all the time that creates cynicism, it even creates violence. The despair, which is the idea that we are all separate. We're here for ourselves, and it's a win-lose situation.
Yeah.
All of that, it builds a culture of despair.
Mm-hmm. So where and how are you seeing that despair?
Well, our national politics, the international military conflicts, the civil wars. It's pandemic. It's global. It's not just local. I mean, there's things that happen within families where we have, typically in Oregon or rural areas, you will see murder-suicides where a person who's very distraught and in very much despair and hopelessness will shoot his entire family and then himself. It's incredibly tragic.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, sometimes with the despair, it seems like it might be kind of this level of despair that's almost like accepted as a normalcy, that we don't even see the despair because we're so used to kind of just feeling it and accepting it as kind of like a normal state within. Oh, this is just normality. So
yeah, it's just like, oh, it's another Monday. Oh, it's another school shooting. Oh, it's another bought election. Oh, I mean, it's just normal. I mean, I don't even read much more than the headlines on Google News. I just scan down there really quickly. I spend less than a minute scanning the headlines just to see if there's something other than normal in the news. As the media tends to keep that culture of despair going. They live on it. They're like, well, parasites.
Yeah. So how are you kind of seeing that? Was it kind of something in yourself? I mean, the kind of, you know what I mean? It's like, how do we go from that sense of despair, maybe even not even being very aware of it, to kind of even seeing it and doing something about it?
So you're asking, how did I experience that in my personal life?
As well.
A crisis. I was suicidal. I had 20 years of using drugs and alcohol, and that had basically destroyed all of my relationships and was starting to destroy my health physically. And it became very apparent that I was either going to die loaded with drugs and alcohol, or I was going to get clean. And it was a terrifying decision because getting clean had a whole bunch of unknowns. I had no idea what that might be like. It was like jumping off a cliff. And that really began the journey, because then I started to become open to new information. And I've seen this happen culturally in our society, where only when a crisis hits us, like Hurricane Katrina, do people start to become open to new possibilities, like helping their neighbors, or like even going across the country and considering someone they've never met before to be their neighbor. And that's radically new. But it seems to only happen after a crisis. After 9/11, there were people who really cared, who really reached out to other people to help them. And to me, that's love. When we get our self-interest out of the way. And I mean, when we do that, what naturally wants to just bubble up and bubble forth is this pouring out of compassion and help for other people. And I think I'm starting to rattle on here, but I think that we first have to have some self-compassion for ourselves.
So that's the first step, is kind of not judging ourselves and kind of looking at ourselves and
having some self-forgiveness and grieving the damage that we have done to ourselves. We're so good at denial in this culture. We deny death, we deny illness, we deny... I myself, even just the other day, denied that I needed a nap. So finally, it got through to me, and I took a nap, and I slept much longer than I thought I would. I slept for 3 hours, and I felt so much better. And it was like this aha moment that I need to pay attention to these messages from my body.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you went kind of through that process yourself with the addiction and your relationships falling apart, your life falling apart, and you kind of hit that proverbial rock bottom. And then at some point, you're kind of like deciding, like, how do I go on? And you need some kind of a transition. Maybe it's that sense of just being about yourself. It's all about me, and you can kind of like never get enough, and then you got to start thinking kind of differently at that point.
Well, yeah, it's thinking about yourself more in terms of taking care of yourself as if you were your own best friend or your own best parent. You kind of reparent yourself. Whereas before, this focus on me is actually, it's a focus on what other people are doing to me. And it's a lot of blame. It's a lot of projection of my faults onto other people. You know, this is classic kind of ego psychology that when we are caught up in our fears and our own pain and our own suffering, we deny it, but we see it everywhere around us. And we just, we're living in hell, basically, because we see this gulf of separation.
Yeah, it seems like the pain part or the fear is like we want to avoid it. You know, we don't want to feel it, so we kind of avoid it and push it away. And that pushing away only kind of feeds it and keeps it going. We push harder to kind of avoid it, push harder to avoid it. And that pain, that fear, the alienation wants to be seen. So, one way, I mean, I've seen is instead of avoiding it, we have to find ways of going to it and being present with it.
Yeah. And this is where it really helps to have a listener, someone who just simply is witnessing your pain, your suffering, your grief, your anguish, and asking you to tell more. And tell me more, and tell me more. And it's like, I've heard this expression, emptying your balloon, because we stuff all of this negativity. And when we release it and we share it with someone else who's just listening, they're not offering advice, they're not giving opinions or judgment, they're just listening, there's such a safe space. And we do what's called a dump. I've seen this happen again and again in small therapy groups and in support groups, and even in just one-on-one relationships where after somebody dumps, their emotional tension tends to subside to such a point where new information starts to bubble up, and they start to see, and I did this too for myself, that, oh yeah, there was a point where I made a decision. And for example, my decision when I was very young was to not trust anybody, not trust. And so when I got to that point where I dumped enough negativity where I could see I had made that decision, nobody else had made the decision for me, I had made it myself, then I was free. I could say, well, I don't have to decide that again today. I could decide differently today. I could decide to extend trust just a little bit to see if it works. And it works. It does. And those little baby steps turn into little bigger steps, and before you know it, you're off and running.
So it sounds like that instead of avoiding our pain, if we can find someone who actually is there and present and kind of empathizes and listens to us, that we can kind of go through and share those experiences and slowly kind of go deeper and deeper to where we can actually share our pain with others. And that kind of lets us kind of go to it, but in kind of with a partner. So we're not alone going to that pain.
Well, there's this old saying that trouble shared is halved and joy shared is doubled. But you're talking about empathy. And I agree with the worldempathy.org definition of empathy, that it is not love. For me, love is the pouring out of oneself for the benefit of another, whereas empathy is taking in someone else's pain and just witnessing it. Like I said, no judgment, no opinions, no advice, just witnessing it. Like, for example, if someone is talking to me about their visit to the dentist, I get this gut feeling right down below my rib cage, and it's like kind of like a wince, like, ooh, don't tell me anymore. I don't want to hear it.
The drill, huh?
Yeah.
It comes to mind.
Yeah, or if they're talking about a sprained ankle or something else, a fall off of a bicycle, is like, I can feel the hurt. That to me is empathy. Is actually experiencing someone else's experience. And well, that all about the mirror neuron stuff, where if you nod your head, I can feel my head nodding.
Kind of the mechanism, the biological, neurological mechanism of how empathy works.
Yeah, but we can't really experience it unless we're open to it. If we're so caught up in our own stuff mentally, that the empathy just never rises to the level of conscious awareness. I think we're always empathetic, even when we think we're not. Because, as you probably know, 90% of our communication, 95% of our communication is nonverbal. And so one of the things I talk about in my book is that stuff that's missing from our normal conversation and communication. And that's one of the skepticisms I have about internet communication that uses text only.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need the richer quality of person-to-person communication and connection.
Yeah, It's so much richer.
So your book is really kind of going from that sense of violence and alienation to a path to love. Is that?
Yeah.
And so
yeah,
one of the steps towards that is to empathize with someone, and that is a way to kind of be present with them. It allows them you hear them. You can go deeper. You can start addressing the pain, the anxieties or fears that someone has, and then they can kind of find solutions themselves without you even having to fix it. It's just that they have someone to go to that space with, and that's maybe, I don't know, would you say, is that then how then love kind of can follow, or?
Well, empathy is like the drawing out of that stuff so that the person who is in pain and suffering, like you said, they hear what it was they needed to hear. They tell themselves their own story to the point to where their story starts to make sense. That's one of the great things about talking is it becomes linear. It's no longer this whirlwind of gestalt running around in our head and our heart, and it starts to become linear, and then it starts to make sense, and we hear it. And I have a whole chapter on just the art of listening, how important it is to just listen. And what you're saying about love, yeah, love is something that kind of grows slowly out of that trust that's created from the listening process. And it's to me, it's an uncovering process. It's not anything that you can force into place. You can't go to school and learn how to love. But you can go into situations that slowly peel away the barriers to the natural love we feel. I feel that our natural state is one of loving, of feeling like we are here on this planet to really be of service to other people. And if we don't do that, we don't feel right inside. We feel like, ooh, something's wrong. Ooh, something's in the way. And yeah, we create our own barriers. And we do it unconsciously. It's part of our culture. All those unwritten rules and taboos, they get in the way. And part of coming back to love is learning how we did that initial learning process of learning to live with despair from day to day. We need to review our history. We need to take it apart piece by piece.
Kind of like the onion. So there's maybe all these blocks to that love, like the onion. We need to peel away those blocks.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Yeah. For me, love is like a state of complete relaxation where you're alert, but your attention is broad, and you're taking in all the stimuli, and you're enjoying it no matter what it is. It's just like wonderful. And little children are like this. They look at stuff with big eyes and they're just taking it in. And it's all new and wonderful. We're in the moment. That's another way of describing what it is to be in love. It's not being in love to me is not just the romantic kind of man and woman or two other people or anything. It's a state of consciousness. It's a state of seeing oneself connected to everything that is, basically, is what it comes down to. But at least connected to everything in your immediate environment. That it all has meaning, it all has purpose, it all has exchanges of energy that work.
Well, what I'm kind of curious about is that relationship of how despair kind of happens. It's like, so if we have that sense of openness and connection, it's like somehow this sense of despair comes in. And it's like, what are the mechanisms? I mean, I just see myself wondering, well, what are the mechanisms? They create they create that despair. How do we kind of get there? I don't know if you cover that in your book, but
it starts in our childhood. It starts maybe even before we're born with our attitude of our parents towards having children and what that means to them. Back when I was born in the 40s, and even today, parents feel like they own their children. Their children are their property. That there is a seed of despair because the child starts to feel like they are the slave of the parent. They have to be good, look good, act good, sound good for the parent. And even after the parent is gone, dead and gone, that voice is internal about following the rules. And those rules are all like superficial ways of keeping us apart from each other and being dishonest with others and ourselves about what's really going on. I had someone just tell me yesterday that as a child, their grandmother kept saying to them, just be nice, be nice, which in another way says, don't tell anyone how you really feel. And so that starts this basic dishonesty with ourselves. That we push our feelings down, we never find out what they are. And the truth is that our heart has many more neurons than it needs for just pumping blood. And the people at HeartMath have done all of this research and have found out that the heart is sensitive to information at a distance that you could call intuition. And it's very fast, it's very accurate, and the thoughts that occur in the brain are later. They happen later. The heart sends a message to the brain, and then the brain gets busy interpreting that information or ignoring it altogether. So I think heart information, I forget where I was going with this.
Well, it was, we're talking about, how the despair kind of gets started. And kind of what I'm hearing is kind of, if we keep following back, it's kind of, we're born into a culture of despair already.
Oh, yeah.
So the basic culture, we're kind of just, kind of inserted into this culture, and we start kind of adapting to that, to the rules, be nice, or, don't be hurt, or you're just here for, your self-advancement and all those kind of things. So it's already starting at the very beginning. And it sounds like you're saying, as an individual then, kind of becoming aware of that and starting to kind of, peel back all that cultural baggage and values. It's kind of like a value system that we're born into. Values of, violence is valued, greed is valued, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a big disentangling process, like spaghetti, taking out one noodle at a time. Yeah, I mean, you can look at many different ways in which that culture, and I just call it a culture of violence, but you could call it a culture of despair too. The way it's been perpetuated, and it is somewhat self-perpetuating by the government, by the media, by the school systems, and by the unwritten parenting skills that they get handed down from generation to generation without being interrupted or questioned. And only recently have people started to study parenting as a skill and teach it in classrooms. And it's radically different than what your parents and my parents thought parenting was, which is a good thing. And I think it has a lot to do with the culture of peace.
Yeah. So you can have that that personal, unraveling of the onion and all the blocks to empathy and love. And then we can have a cultural unraveling too, unpeeling of the cultural onion, in a sense.
You can't have one without the other. It's holistic, it's systemic. And also, I'm totally convinced that one person unraveling their own system of despair has a ripple effect that will affect the entire culture. And in fact, that's the only way the whole culture will unravel, is through that ripple effect. It doesn't come from the top down, it comes from the bottom up.
Just having people model it and have it be seen there.
Yeah. And I see it happening a lot in organizations that are forming spontaneously all around the world. I mean, people start with their anger against the way things are, but eventually they have to move through their own layers of grief and despair as they work on that. They think they're working on external institutions, like institutions of government, particularly, and they're in rebellion and revolt against that government. But essentially, looking at it systemically, they are in revolt against themselves, because the government would not exist in the condition that it does without their consent, or their parents' consent, or their friends and neighbors' consent that it should exist the way that it does. And so the rebellion against that is, it starts the process, but I think it finishes inside, as particularly the activists learn that if they're going to avoid burnout, beating their head against the wall of City Hall as the metaphor, that they have to build some sustainability in themselves, which means like a resilience. And so they have to ask themselves, well, where is that going to come from? And then it starts a deeper and deeper search into how do I sustain my relationships with my fellow activists? Because oftentimes activist groups, they get into internal conflicts and they'll just fly apart, and that'll be the end of the group. And so it takes a lot of interpersonal development skills to keep an activist group going for like 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, which is what it takes. There's nothing that's going to happen in 6 months or 12 months that is really significant. But, if it happens in 50 years in the context of human history, that's almost instantaneous. And we have to develop in ourselves that long perspective and work towards that and think of something. Well, it's like the man who plants a seed that grows a tree under which he will never sit. We have to have that kind of perspective. And that takes a lot of internal courage and faith and feeling connected to the long-term history of humanity, seeing it as an evolution. Yeah.
Well, I call that, for me, that vision is a culture of empathy, in the sense that empathy is kind of like that first step, and that you were talking about, hearing ourselves, kind of the self-empathy, the self-compassion, hearing others, kind of being present and hearing, having that. There's a metaphor. I asked someone, it was Rick Hansen, I don't know if you know him, but he's written the book Buddha's Brain or something like that. And I asked him for a metaphor of empathy, and he said it's like the angel Gabriel walking with Dante into the levels of hell, and with his arm over the shoulder. So Gabriel has his arm over the shoulder of Dante, and they're slowly walking through the levels of hell, looking at all the horrors. And that's kind of the relationship of empathy, that as we have this, this hell of despair, hell of violence, hell of, all these other, fear and alienation and loneliness, that if you've got your empathy buddy there, it kind of is kind of this first step maybe towards, towards that space of love. And I think with Dante's Inferno all about love too, kind of a, I don't know if you ever read that. Oh.
No, I haven't. I just heard about it.
Yeah.
But you see, but I have seen Star Wars. And, there's the evil empire.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking is, and it's a martial arts movie, really. And the essence of martial arts is to become one with the, quote, enemy. That you have this empathy with where they're coming from, so that you can actually predict what they're going to do next and get out of the way so that you don't get hurt. And they actually have a tendency to hurt themselves. But I developed this kind of way of dealing with alcohol and drug clients when I was a counselor. They were still full of pain and anger. And because I was the group leader or something, they would want to attack me. And I would just keep them coming and say, all right, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And eventually they would tell themselves something that they needed to hear, and it would stop them dead in their tracks. And they would say, oh, Wow. Thank you, Mr. Hazen. Yeah, and it's like that now with, rebellion against the government. We think it's so big and so powerful, but what it's made up of is human beings. And if we can ask those human beings, how do they relate at their deepest level to what's going on in policy and practice of the government, and keep them talking about it and keep them talking about it, eventually you get to the point where there's 100% agreement between your and their, what am I going to say, passion.
Yeah, and there's a sense of connection. It sounds like you're moving to deeper and deeper connection with them in the dialogue. And I think it's that first part. What you're saying is that we're seeing the government as this objectified entity, and a lot of people say, oh, the government's bad, government's useless, but there's people behind that, and we're just like creating this straw man to have an enemy against the fight. And the same thing with the corporations and all the other enemies.
Right.
And I think what you're saying is we need to see the humanity behind those organizations and start a dialogue with them, and that maybe dialogue is the way to go.
All it takes is one whistleblower to unravel an entire organization. And we can create whistleblowers by connecting with them. And I think we might see more and more of that. That a lot of what the government does to keep its power is to keep its secrecy. Or another way of saying it is keeping its denial. And so I think the way forward is to break our denial individually and culturally. When we see a breach of denial in the mainstream media, that's like, wow, another miracle and a giant step forward.
And denial being what I'm a little confused. I'm not sure what really denial is. What are you seeing denial being? It's like a lack of transparency, or?
Yeah, and it's a dishonesty, a lack of integrity, a lack of authenticity. It's a pretending that things are different than what they really are. It's telling lies. Like Bush on the aircraft carrier saying that the war is over, victory is won. Ho, ho, ho. Not true.
So how do you address that? I mean, how do you engage him in a dialogue at that point?
Well, you don't.
I thought the idea was to create a dialogue here.
Well, you have to create a dialogue between equals. And so, like I said, it comes from the bottom up. And like if you could create a dialogue with Colin Powell, for example, but in order to do that, you have to create a dialogue with someone he trusts that is at a lower level of, power in the hierarchy. So I think the hierarchy, unravels from the bottom up, and to kind of directly go into the top and say, all right, I'm going to talk to President Bush, it doesn't work.
Well, David, I tend to kind of wander all over the place with these dialogues. You sent me a couple of steps or a couple of points that I wanted to be sure that we covered. So one was you're saying define the problem. 2 is give up the struggle, and 3, repair the damage. So do you want to kind of go through those steps, like what those steps are and how they work?
Yeah, well, we've mentioned parts of this already, but overcoming the obstacles to empathy, I think, has to start with some basic definitions. For example, why feelings are important, why nonverbal heart knowledge is useful, describing how it's fast and accurate, and how words and linear communication tends to be error prone and only part of the communication. And if we're ever going to solve our problems of conflict, we have to learn how to communicate. In my book, I talk about how I saw this as a teenager, that within my family, there was a lot of anger and violence and conflict. And I saw the same thing happening between the United States and Russia over the nuclear weapons issue. And we were all going to die if we didn't get that problem solved. And it was just so obviously a problem of communication. And communication, to me, has a root word, commune. And commune is that empathy thing of being able to share and understand each other's feelings, which goes back to who are we as human beings. We're social animals. We're immersed in a culture, and that's what it means to be human. Human beings cannot exist very long in nature by themselves. As an animal, we're pretty weak, and there are other predators who are much stronger than we are. So humans need to live in society together. And in fact, there are people who've said that's the only way we have been able to survive as a species to this point, is through cooperation and collaboration. And people ignore that and they focus on all the wars. But there's been a lot of collaboration that has brought us to the point we are now. And our natural state is to be trusting and loving. And that's where we want to try to return back to. It's a recovery process. I call it recovery from violence dependency. And for me, violence dependency is about the same thing as chemical dependency. Just switch the words in the definition and you've got it pretty well defined. There's an important component of relaxation that goes with being social, that social, being connected with other people should be causing us to feel safe rather than feeling anxious or tense. So that's part of the definition of the problem. And I think when we see ourselves in an evolutionary process where we are now at the point where we can self-consciously self-examine what we've done so far and project out into the future, possible futures, we can start to make choices. And I think because of the internet and the rapid spread of information over the internet that can be tested by millions of people, we are now getting very close to being one species that is self-consciously evolving and towards a vision that we all share, a vision of even better collaboration that works for everyone and does not involve violence, especially military violence. And part of that process is that we're learning to think about how we think, so that we aren't just processing information and making decisions. We're looking at the decisions we make and trying to see the context of that decision and how we personally affected those decisions. Thinking about how we think and whether we were thinking in a relaxed way or we were thinking in a tense way is, I think, one of the basic distinctions we need to make.
So it's really about kind of a self-awareness and kind of awareness of what's going on inside of ourselves then.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I said earlier it starts with self-empathy. Empathy.
Like where's our tensions, where's our stresses, what's happening in our emotional dynamics, and kind of being aware of how that all kind of fits together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, when is a good time to make a decision? Should I wait until I've had my nap before I decide to respond with this email that I'm all upset about? Should I have someone else read my email before I push the send button? Those kinds of decisions.
So kind of be aware of where our anxieties and stresses are too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's important that as part of this process of definition of the problem, we need to include measures. And some of those measures, like the Global Peace Index and Community Progress Indicators, are good measures of our health, our overall social health. And, without those, we're just kind of like being very subjective about our evolutionary process. So following this initial self-awareness of where we are in our process, we need to consciously dive into our grief, our negativity, and in a safe place, dump it, get rid of it, share it, discharge it, empty the balloon. And once it's outside of ourselves, we get to see it. When it's inside of ourselves, it's like spinning around in this mess. But when it's outside of ourselves and we spell it out, either verbally or in writing or acting it out as a dance, or we start to see it differently. And we start to see that we are free to make new decisions. And we start to take care of ourselves better. We start to reduce our stress, improve our resilience, become more self-caring. And when we're there, then we are ready to trust other people with our listening. We can take stuff in. It's not like adding more burden to a huge burden that we carry already of pain and suffering. It's like, I've emptied myself, and now I have room for you. That kind of thing. I think that builds a tremendous kind of strength and wisdom within us, so that then we can turn around and we can start to repair the damage that has been done to our culture. We can start to make amends. We can start to, by making new decisions about, like, for example, how to take care of homeless people, returning veterans, the abused children, and people like that. We can start to be really useful and collaborative with other people and work with other people to turn things around. And I think at that point, we will start to see new forms of art and especially humor. Start to celebrations of ourselves as human beings with foibles, human beings with vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and giving ourselves permission to say it's all okay, it's all good, it's all part of the learning process. All of these problems that we're carrying, they're all our opportunities to just turn around and make it better. And if we don't, we're missing the boat. We're being disloyal to ourselves in a way. I think the route to happiness, to personal happiness and cultural happiness, is when we find that authentic integrity where we take care of ourselves so we can take care of other people, in a nutshell.
And then you'd mentioned, well, how is that giving up the struggle? What is that? The struggle for what?
The struggle for being right, the struggle for the looking good, acting good, sounding good, and the conventional terms of success, what we think of as like monetary success, social success, all of that stuff, even spiritual success. When the more we strive for that stuff, the more it slips away. There are many stories about rich people who are very unhappy. You can't buy happiness. Happiness comes with accepting things the way that they are, whether you're rich or whether you're poor. Yeah. So does that answer your question about giving up the struggle?
It's kind of giving. And then it was kind of like repair the damage. It's like, I guess the struggle is I guess you could even go deeper into the struggle, that it's kind of maybe a struggle, of fear. Maybe, we have these fears that, we struggle to kind of acquire to be heard. You have to be important to be heard. It's almost like there's this carrot laid out there that if you want empathy, you got to go and, in connection, you got to go and do all these things. And
you got to yell.
You got to yell to be heard.
Yeah. There's you were connecting earlier the culture of empathy to the culture of love and the culture of peace. And I just want to say that for me, the definition of peace is being so secure in your own being that you know you have nothing to fear, that you are indestructible in a way. Of course, your body is going to dissolve, but there's a part of you which is going to live on, that is going to be of usefulness to the planet, to the world, and it cannot be killed, cannot be damaged, cannot be harmed. And people who have been in like Auschwitz and in prison have gotten in touch with these things, have written beautiful poetry, and have been of great encouragement to their fellow prisoners. So for me, that's peace. This is being at peace with yourself, being at peace with the world, being at peace with your fellow human beings. And like we were saying earlier, it radiates. It's contagious.
Okay, and then it was kind of repair the damage. You had like mentoring, wisdom circles, service to humanity, art and humor, kind of.
Yeah.
It's really how do we go from where we are and start creating maybe social structures and processes and so forth for kind of transforming society from the violence, fear to empathy and love.
Yeah, we are in the process of inventing these social structures, doing things that we've never done before.
I might add one thing, because I've thought about this, is the you just used the story of Auschwitz. It's kind of like, I see a little bit now that we live in a society, and a lot of the human potential movement and all this is kind of like saying, well, just connect to yourself, love yourself or whatever. And we're living in Auschwitz, like is a very extreme situation. Somehow, you can meditate, you can do all this stuff, you can do yoga, and you can maybe get more centered. The thing is you're still headed to the gas chambers kind of horror. So we live in a social structure as well. And for me, a culture of empathy is really about that personal part and, actively transforming, the concentration camp, so that we kind of convert, the commandant, the officers, all the people, and say, we want a culture of empathy. We're not going to settle for anything less. And what's your problem with it, basically?
Yeah. Because when we're at peace, we know that the commandant and the guards want the same thing that we do. We just intuitively know that, or we assume it and we act on it, and it becomes true. We speak it into existence. And it's irresistible. That's my belief. That's my faith.
Well,
and it's very scary also at the same time, because they have all this power. And we know we're living in Auschwitz, a global Auschwitz. Yeah. I mean, the presence of nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert should be on everybody's mind when they get up in the morning. And that should empower them to get out of their house, off of their sofa, and out in the street and talking to their neighbors about real stuff, not just the garden and the price of beans. But we live in a global Auschwitz. I like that metaphor.
Yeah, it becomes how we convert. It's like I kind of see we have to be kind of activists in ourselves, but also be activists. I call it evangelical empathy. It's like coming from a Baptist background, so it's like it's like somehow we have to engage the commandant and all the officers, and then say we want a culture of empathy, and they'll say, well, and empathize with them with whatever their reasons are for not wanting it. And so somehow we have to find a way in social structures for having the attitude and maybe the social structures to kind of talk, to empathize with them as well. That the means for a culture of empathy have to be, the ends too, or the ends have to be the means. I guess I'm saying.
The final sentence in my book is. Letting go of rational control is both the goal and the method for getting there. And what that means is being in the present moment. And that means also being empathetic, being very present to receive the information you're getting from other people and the environment. And it's very closely related to the martial arts. We think we're such great warriors, and we're not. We're chicken shit warriors.
Well, the martial arts, maybe Aikido, I think, is the martial art that most addresses that. You're not trying to dominate your opponent, but to hold their humanity and your humanity at the same time, so that you're not doing harm to them or harm to yourself.
Right. You're transforming them. You're transforming your relationship. That's what Gandhi was doing. He's transforming the relationship between the Indians and the British.
Well, good. So I think we've gone for about an hour. We could maybe, if you have some kind of point that you think that's really important, I want to be sure everything you want to say has been heard, or we might have to do a couple more of these to totally unpack the onion, unwrap the onion.
I'll just say one thing, and I think it particularly applies to males in our culture, that we're very unwilling to admit our vulnerability and our powerlessness and ask for help. And so far, the peace movement has been actually dominated by women, which is a good thing. I think the Dalai Lama said the world will be saved by Western women. But the men have to get on board. It's not just the women that are going to survive. We need the men too. And that's one of the biggest initial hurdles, is just admit that we can't do this alone.
We need each other.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Edwin. It's been fun.
Yeah, good. I've been trying to get you to do one of these dialogues, so I'm glad we had a chance to do that, and we'll continue working together. I've enjoyed so much working with you, and just the way you've articulated so many different kind of aspects of this movement, and how you've written about it, and so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the most newest piece of information in my book is that we need to look at violence as if it were an addiction. Because if we can do that, then we can define it as a disease that has a therapy that will put it in remission. I don't think we'll ever get rid of violence totally, but we can put it in remission.
Okay, well, we'll continue working on that together then, David. It's good to have you as a partner on this journey.
Yeah, well, like I said the other day, we support your goals.
Okay, well, with that, I will bring this call to an end, and we'll continue in the future doing more, I hope.
All right, yeah, we'll be in touch, and let me know where you post this.
Definitely will. It'll be a couple days, and it'll be up on YouTube. So,
terrific. Thanks, Edwin.
Okay, thanks, David. Bye.
Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.